Welcome to curl 8.12.0. This is February 5, 2025, and yeah, we hit a new release today that I want to tell you a little bit about. A little bit of sore throat, so bear with me today. Yeah, this is me. I'm Daniel Stenberg. I work on curl. I called myself lead developer. I founded the thing for a long time ago. This is release 264. A kind of an amazing number, yes, but and it keeps going up. Strange how that works. And this time around, we've had a bunch of participators, of course. We count 65 contributors, out of which 34 are new. A lot of people have helped out, and out of those 34 authored commits, 18 of those authors were new in this release cycle. 1,341 commit authors in total as of yesterday, when I did the count at least. And this was a full release cycle this time, full meaning 8 weeks, so that is 56 days. We're on 9,819 days since we shipped curl. And I always have this struggle, do I count from with created curl or from the moment HTTP GET was released roughly 1.5 years earlier? But anyway, this is the curl number of days. So we have a few security advisories this time around, again, unfortunately or luckily or whatever it is. So I just want to go through them a little bit and tell you about them. As always, as usual, I strongly recommend that you go to our security page and read up about the details here, because as you know, others who talk about these issues will have a different story, a different severity, and say possibly they say something else, or they actually usually do, often do, many times do. And so this time we have 3 to announce. They're all rated severity low by the curl security team. And here we go. So one, when people report security problems, in many cases they feel like, oh, right, and you feel sort of a pain in your brain because why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I fix that before? And in this particular case, this is almost the same bug as a previous bug that we recently had. Basically, maybe a strangely formatted .NET RC file in combination with a redirect would make curl send the wrong credential to the, picking credentials for the wrong host, so that you would sort of leak your credentials to host A to host B in a silly way. In this particular case, it's even more unlikely to actually happen because you need to have a fairly, I wouldn't say broken, but unusual and sort of useless way to form syntax in the .NET RC file. You basically have to have a default entry without login and password in the .NET RC file, which, I mean, there's really no point to have that. So I would expect that very few people actually have that on purpose, because why would you? It doesn't do anything except for triggering this bug, of course, if you would have this curl version. Super annoying, shouldn't hit that many people, but if it does, it might leak a password if you have all of these different prerequisites and the combinations set. And so we call it severity low. We also call it CVE 2025-0167, reported by Zihang Zhu. I don't know how to pronounce his name, of course. And we reward him $500, which is the standard rate now for low severity ones in the curl project. I should also mention that it's kind of fun thing that we registered this CVE just a few hours into the new year. I mean, 1st of January, I think at 1 a.m. or something, and we still got 167. I would have expected it to be a lower number. Anyway, moving on. This is the first one, the netrc and default credential leak, and it sounds similar to previous one because it is very similar to previous one, but slightly different. And we have a double close, and we call it event FD double close, CVE 2025-0665. And this is a so we use the event FD. Event FD is it's a file descriptor used for event signaling pretty much. So we use it when curl is built to use the threaded name resolver. We fire up a new helper thread, and from that helper thread we signal to the main thread when we're done. So basically the main thread waits for the activity on that file descriptor. Now we're done, now we can move on, which is cool. But we accidentally closed the file descriptor twice. And we did that because this was usually done with a socket pair, which has two descriptors, but this only has one. Anyway, and because of how we sort of fixed another bug, this behavior was introduced in this particular version, 8.11.1. So, and because this happens with a very, very short time in between the first close and the second close, it might trigger something. If in the same process you're opening this file descriptor, it could close the wrong one, another one, of course, and cause problems. We call it severity low because it's unlikely to ever actually be possible to exploit from an attacker's point of view, but still a security problem. The reporter here, Ancom Cooper, reported this, but it was actually fixed already in Git, and we didn't really consider the security aspect of this. So therefore, it was both originally reported and fixed by other people than Ancom. So it sort of highlighted the security aspect to us because we couldn't think of it ourselves because we're stupid. And the third one, and bear with me, this is one that might get discussed after the fact because this is CVE 2025-0725. And here, look at this. This is a gzip integer overflow causing a buffer overflow. And you know, buffer overflows are bad. Okay, but okay, we start with that. But to trigger this bug, this is a bug in curl, but curl has a runtime choice that it selects which g. Okay, sorry. So you have this is triggered when you ask libcurl to automatically decompress gzip content, which you do with this curl opt accept encoding option with libcurl. You can also use -- compressed with the curl tool. And if then the server offers gzip compressed data, libcurl will automatically decompress it when it receives data, the compressed data. That's sort of a functionalities that we've had for 25 years. But in this case, curl then dynamically checks which zlib version do we use. If it's older than 1.2.0.4, then we use this particular code flow. So that means that you need to use zlib 1.2.0.3 or older to be vulnerable. And if you use that ancient version, then and you have a malicious server, that server can then trigger a bug in curl that makes it overflow an integer that is then used for a malloc, and it could then overflow a buffer with content coming from the server. I'm not so sure exactly, but we're still stuck on this fact that you need this zlib version, and you need 1.2.0.3 or older. This particular release was released in the summer of 2003. And so if you have a newer one, you're not vulnerable. And a newer one means that if you're just using a 21 years old version, you're good. So, well, almost 21 years, or what is it? I can't do math. But anyway, so the vulnerable version was, or earlier, that was sort of released in May 2003. It should be really, really rare that anyone actually still are using this particular version. And if anyone is using this version, it has a whole slew of other security problems as well. So you would be vulnerable to a long series of serious problems. So therefore, we have this struggle. We have had this struggle. How do we treat this particular security problem? It is a bug in curl. It is. But to trigger it, you need to use this ancient, vulnerable, really outdated, forgotten about zlib version. We eventually decided to consider it a bug just because it is a bug. We still set the severity low because the the likeliness of this ever actually happening to anyone is tiny. And I'm sure someone can still argue somehow that someone could still do that because, sure, it is a dynamic check right on the version number. So you could, in theory, use that old version, patch all the security fixes so you have a secure zlib version that still says that it is this old version, and then curl would be vulnerable. Yeah, in a theoretical concept, yeah, but anyway. So that was reported by Z2. He's an old, I mean, he has reported many other security bugs before, so he's a trusted and very good security researcher. He finds the most hilarious bugs in our code. Uh, anyway, moving on. Those were the 3 security fixes. As I mentioned already, go read up about them in detail on the website because we try to summarize everything we know when the bug was inserted, fixed, and all sort of details around it. So um, go there and read them and figure out exactly how they possibly affect you or not affect you. So we did a bunch of new things in this release. So we started out and we added, for example, I added byte range support to the variable support in the command line tool. So basically you can now get a byte range of a file, which, for example, allows you to do an upload of a piece of a file instead of sending the entire file, which people has requested in the past. We also made sure that the e-tag save acknowledges the create this option, which is a tiny thing. If you want to save the e-tag data in a new directory structure, you can now do that. We added a new time queue variable to the -w option, which means you can now get curl to tell you how long a transfer was actually queued internally before it was sent off. A tiny internal detail, but the queuing is basically when curl waits for conditions to be right before it can sense out can do its job really. So sometimes due to conditions, like if we only tell curl we only allow one connection, parallel connection, for example, and you do a lot of requests, maybe it needs to wait a while until it can fires off its next request, then it's queued for a while. Now you can get that queue time after the transfer was done. We have a new option for libcurl users. It's not exposed to the command line tool, at least not yet, on which authentication method was used in a previous transfer. Because when you use authentication with curl and HTTP, you can say, here are the different methods I allow to be used, and libcurl will transparently go with the best of those and use it. And now you can also query curl, hey, which one did you end up using? I have blogged about this separately, but we dropped all support for the hyper backend in this release. It's been something that we have mentioned for a long time already, so it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. But now you can no longer build with the experimental hyper backend. It's gone, history. Moving on. We support keys and certificates from a so-called PKCS11 provider if you build with OpenSSL. Providers are their new way to do what was previously sort of engines, right? I think the provider is the new concept they do. Now you can do keys and certificates, at least with curl. We have new support. So if you build quick support into curl with ngTCP2 and GNU TLS, and you set this option called early data. You can now get curl 0 RTT with quick, which is a way to just do quicker handshake and set data earlier in the quick handshake. Basically, if you have a operation done over quick, it reduces the time necessary. I mean, in some cases, it can actually speed up your operations quite a lot because you can really save latency in the handshake. And we have now new experimental support for SSL session import and export, meaning that you can export and import a full SSL session cache pretty much. And why do you want that? Well, because reusing sessions or tickets makes the following TLS handshake faster. So by using a saved SSL TLS, I kind of mixed them there. If you use one of these saved sessions, you can get a faster TLS handshake, and you can use the 0 RTT and everything. So basically, it's a way for you to speed up your subsequent TLS operations. So if you want to do really fast ones, save the sessions and reuse them, especially if you have jobs that you want to do a lot, or cron jobs or whatever. And this, as I mentioned, this experimental. Now we're going to work more on that going forward. Yes, actually, I think I've had some other additional changes later, but I'm going to mention them as bug fix because what's the difference? Okay, 244 bug fixes in this release, depending on how you count, of course, and I'm going to mention my favorite ones coming up now. I had a really hard time to figure out which my favorite were this time. Okay. First, we now acknowledge that you can disable the list of servers you can set with this option. Previously, you couldn't disable the set, which was kind of annoying, which, yeah. So if you set a custom set, now you can reset it to no custom set. Makes sense to me. There was a problem if you set this. This is an alternative to setting the curl URL option. You can set the curl U option, which is if you it's curl U is a handle from the URL API. So for example, if you use the URL API to parse the URL, you can pass in the sort of pre-parsed URL this way. But there was some discrepancies in when you sort of which overrode which, and yeah, better now. Here's the feature I mentioned. It's really a minor change. It's listed as a bug fix here. We have initial support for HTTPS RR records. They're resource records. They're not RR records. They're just RR. Meaning, if you build curl and enable this feature, it's experimental, but then curl will ask for HTTPS records from your DNS servers and start to use them. The use is so far fairly limited, but we are going to expand that going forward. And it's a journey here. And of course, if you're interested in this sort of thing, enable it, try it, and tell us what fails and what works and everything. Or help us just expand this support because it's pretty cool. HTTPS records is a whole universe. I will blog and talk about that separately at some point, but we've started. We banned the use of scanf in the source code. It's a journey, this too. We've been going at it for a long time, sort of gradually been reducing the use of this function. It's not in itself necessarily a terribly bad function, so it can be used. You can do a lot of fun things with it. You parse text with it pretty much, but it's hard to parse in a really good way. It's hard to handle over integer overflows, and it's hard to do error checks and boundary checks and properly, and it leads to some sloppy behaviors. So we have gradually tried to remove that, and in this release we finally removed the last few calls that we had previously, and now we've added this to the list of functions that we don't want in the libcurl source code. In the curl, no, we don't have any either. So basically, no more scanf, and we won't introduce new calls to that either. We of course already ban a few other functions as well, but this was just the latest one to the collection of functions we try to avoid, or rather we're forced to avoid now because the script will detect it and yell at anyone who tries. If you set this, if you limit the number of connections, maximum number of connections, parallel connection, or maximum number of connections to a single host name when you use curl, we could still go over that limit if we had shut down connections remaining to those hosts. So basically, we had a little bit of a mix up there how to count the number of connections. The thing we now have, because recently we sort of decided to treat connections being shut down in the shutdown process. They are now sort of handled a little bit separately, differently, but they're still existing connections. So they're now counted as proper connections as long as they actually are connections. When they're shut down, they're no longer connections. Strange, right? Now you can build, if you build libcurl with libzstd, Z standard, it's a compression library, right? They do the zstd decompression. If you build curl with this, you can now, it will now, if you build with that statically linked, you can now use their custom memory function. So when it asks for alloc, it will actually use libcurl's memory functions, which you can provide in the curl global init thing that allows you to set those. So you basically makes more use of the established customized memory functions. We have said there's a new cookie RFC pending. It's not been published yet, but it's sort of in the process. It's close to getting published. It's called right now RFC 6265 bis because it's the update of the 6265 RFC. It's for HTTP cookies. And in this update of the cookie spec, it says a cookie client. I don't remember the exact phrasing, but it says basically that we should all cap the expire time of cookies to no more than 400 days. So no cookies should be allowed to have exist longer than 400 days. And now we adhere to that. So we basically, whatever expire date that comes over the wire and says, hey, I want to expire in 32 years, we now cap that to 400 days. I also fixed another silly thing in so when a cookie is sent over the wire in a header, it has a lot of detail and the details and metadata for that particular cookie, and one of those particular metadata is the expire date. And the expire date is a ridiculous format because it's pretty much a free form date string, and by tradition that date string is very liberal. It could say this format in a variety of different ways, and it is actually also used like that over sort of in the world. So it's really hard to parse the date. It's not very strict in which format to follow. So a parser that parses this date needs to be very liberal and try to parse whatever it sends at us. And that means that the curl date parser is very liberal. It basically skips all the junk that it doesn't understand and tries to make sense of what it gets. But the problem with that is that we gave it too much data on the too much out of the cookie header, so it could actually parse the date into the next field. That if that was numeric could mix up the date and you got the wrong expire date. A long explanation for saying that we made the expire date parser better. I mentioned the shutdown connections are handled slightly separately nowadays. It also meant that we have accidentally forgotten to include them in the curl multi-fd set function, so they weren't included in the set it reported, so it would not wait on all those connections correctly. Now it does. We fixed a mutex locking thing on old Windows. We have this bare bones silly mutex internally built thing It's a little bit ugly. It works mostly, but it didn't do the right thing on old Windows versions. Old being, I think, before Windows 10, Windows 8, I don't remember. Read up on the details if you run on old Windows. So we have experimental support for ECH, right? Encrypted client hello, and now it works better with recent OpenSSL changes. So it seems that OpenSSL is gradually actually merging ECH support and ECH features. So the latest kernel now keeps up with those particular changes. I don't think it still has a complete set of support. I mean, it's not. I don't think the support is complete yet in upstream OpenSSL, but there are patches pending, so you can still build a curl using that patched OpenSSL to do ECH if you want to. Or, I mean, if you want to play with ECH, it's experimental, but read up about it. We have documentation in the curl repo, and you can build it with a number of different TLS libraries and play around with it and see how it works and tell us about it. We fixed the time app connect timer for early data with GNU TLS because it became wrong. Early data, since that sends data earlier in the handshake, it changes the flow a little bit sometimes. So we fixed the bug with that. We make sure now that if a client sets the TE request header in a request sort of manually, we now strip it because in these specs, oh, what a typo. It says HTTP2 and HTTP3, they don't support this header. It's a sort of a forbidden header, so now we just strip it. We fixed embed TLS. So if you build curl with embed TLS for TLS, there was a bug in sending large data chunks somehow, but we ended up actually ruining or we didn't send the whole thing or whatever it was. It was pretty bad, but now it's better. We had another MIME thing. So if you would set a MIME form post in a particular way and then resend the same MIME post again, it would not send it correctly the second time because it wouldn't rewind everything correctly after it had been used once. Now it's better. Going on. This is a fun thing. So I fixed mprintf integer handling and float precision, and this sounds really strange, but so mprintf is the internal printf functionality that libcurl uses for its own purposes, and we provide it in a external API too. Providing it in that external API is the mistake. I so regret that we ever offered that, but it's still there in the API, so it's there. Too late. But anyway, so to handle float when you want to output float using this, which we don't do any floats internally, but we provide it in the API, so an external user could do float outputs. And to do that, we use the internal whatever the original smprint or implementation, which in a typical Linux that would be glibc. So we convert the input into an smprint line and ask glibc to do that. And it had a little bit of a problem if you would use the maximum size that we support in precision and width, which is like 300 characters width plus precision or something. It was a messy thing. And while I was doing that, I realized that there's an even worse bug in Windows smprint version. So if we are using this internal smprint thing to do floating point outputs, and you do that on Windows and on a particular older Windows runtime, I think I don't remember. It was before 2015 or something, 2018. I don't remember. But then it wouldn't terminate the output buffer correctly as smprint does on every other single platform on Earth except these particular Windows versions. Then it would smprint into the buffer, but not null terminate the buffer, which caused havoc, of course, if you do that. So we do that manually now, so it should be now we hide this horrible Windows flaw. But still, What a surprise. I had no idea that existed. Um, yeah, this is a function call, right? We fixed the a problem with FD count uh, return, and we fixed the return code. If you would remove an easy handle from the multi-handle with curl multi-remove handle, and that handle was already removed, we had a regression that we changed the return code there because it's always been okay to do that, and then suddenly we returned an error instead, and people's applications of course broke because we broke the ABI, and we should not do that. So we fixed that. That was a regression. We have now moved the SSL cache, which is S cache, the session cache. The session cache can now, if you use a multi-handle, that's now by default held in the multi-handle, which is a huge benefit for anyone using the multi-interface, because now suddenly all the connections, all the easy handles in the multi-connection can share and take advantage of the shared session cache instead of having it separate per easy handle, which was sort of just there. It was a mistake. This is much better. Should improve multi-handle applications. Possibly significant. I mean, if for applications that actually close the TLX connections and want to reestablish them, that could be a real boost in performance. We fixed the open SSL coexist option, which is so now for the first time really you can properly build curl using both bugfixes and OpenSSL in the same build and have it dynamically pick either or when you start up curl, like you can for other TLS backends. Previously you couldn't use them both at the same time because bugfixes has a OpenSSL API option, which means that it then provides the same symbols, right, as OpenSSL. But now you can build them in a way that they don't, and then you can use both and select either or at startup time. Kind of a fun thing to do. We got an improvement for the OpenSSL quick build. So if you build curl to do quick using OpenSSL only, the OpenSSL quick stack, it now uses a slightly better way to check for writability on streams using the provided SSL poll function instead of busy looping like crazy. This is just it makes it a little bit nicer API wise, and it didn't necessarily make it faster. So it is still a fairly slow quick backend. So if you want to do quick for real, we still recommend using the ngTCP2 backend, and that's still the only quick backend we don't consider experimental. All the other ones are still marked experimental. We fixed a certificate. Well, this is a memory leak really on an error case when you build with secure transport. We the URL API and really all redirect handling in curl was broken when it comes to just redirecting to just a new fragment or just a new query, which should be an unusual redirect, of course, but that still happens. And it now works. So basically you go to a particular URL and then you redirect to just hash new place, which is just changing the fragment part or just changing the query part, and curl would not do the right thing. Apparently people don't do that too much because I think this has been broken for a really long time, and no one had noticed until now. But now it works, now it's fixed, and it's in the URL API, of course. The idea, if you do curl dash capital V to get a list, versions and everything, features, protocols, curl would not return the IDN feature if curl was built with WinIDN or Apple IDN options. Now it does. And some other things that are not really in libcurl, but I have to mention that Victor has continued to work like crazy. So we have so many CMake improvements in this release again. I mean, there are so many I couldn't even try to begin to describe them. I think they're listed in the ballpark of 40 or 50 of the bug fixes this time. A crazy amount. So the CMake build for curl has improved a lot again. I I got bored by the markdown link checkers we had in the CI and that they were so crappy. So I wrote my own link checker because what do you do? So this is basically now a local script that iterates through all the markdowns in the Git repository, verifies all the internal cross markdown links and all the URLs to external sites and make sure that they look fine. And this is the same script that we then run in the CI. But the benefit here is now that it's easy to run this locally yourself if you ever want to. I suppose most people won't. But anyway, it's there now. We now have it actually the e-tag support in curl is pretty limited in that it really only works good if you provide a single URL. So e-tag is pretty much a single URL feature. We should possibly fix this and improve this in going forward. But right now, instead it just says error if you try to use this option with multiple URLs because it really doesn't work that way. I did a stupid thing so I broke the support for digits when you provided the type feature in the dash dash form option. And that was a regression. I think I did that in the previous release. So it didn't hurt many people. Not many people noticed, but those who do, they were not too happy. Now it works again. I made another e-tag related thing. So I made e-tag compare accept a non-existing file instead of erroring out. So non-existing basically means I don't have an e-tag. Because it turns out in some use cases, you might not have generated the file before you run this compare. So I think it makes sense. No file means no e-tag instead of an error. It just makes for some smoother behavior in some use cases. I added this infrastructure documentation file document in the docs folder. It tries to describe all the infrastructure we have in the curl project that makes the curl project fly, right? So all the servers and services and things that we have and a little bit who's responsible and who's running it and so on. So that just to make everyone aware of what we have and stuff like that. And we have a few new things that we plan to remove going forward. And it might be interesting to just remember and take a little look at that. So we start out with May 2025. We still have these removals scheduled. I think we've said after May, or did we say in May? It doesn't really matter. If you are a user of one of these TLS backends, you should really consider and ponder about what to do next because we're going to remove support for these. The most complaints I've heard so far is the people that are using secure transport and they want to use that because it has support for the native CA store on a few devices, Apple operating systems, really, iOS, macOS. So I would really encourage everyone to consider working on getting that support added for another TLS backend that they can switch to and consider using instead of these. I want to look into that myself a little bit going forward, but I'm not really an Apple device user, so I'm not really the most suitable person to do that. Anyway, that's still on the agenda for May, and coming up after that, for July, we have marked the support for MSH3 as going away. MSH3 is it's actually an HTTP3 library, but in curl, it's a quick and HTTP3 backend. It has not been working for a long time, and it has been updated recently, upgraded really to bumped their versions, and they've changed their API. So it's not even possible to build curl with the latest versions of this anymore. And really, we don't see any strong will anywhere to fix this anytime soon. So we might as well just rip it out, and it shouldn't hurt anyone much because we have other quick backends and HTTP3 support in much better states, really. So we rather move everyone over to where the good stuff is happening. And in September, we have planned to drop the WinBuild build system. WinBuild being a subdirectory in Git and in tarballs, right? WinBuild, and it has a set of make files and stuff, build files for building on Windows with nmake, and you can set a lot of options, blah blah blah. So we're telling all those users of the WinBuild system, switch over to generate your stuff with CMake. And if you go and read the documentation in there, there's a good set of, if you're doing this, use this instead in the future using CMake, because we want to push over users to using fewer build systems. It makes our lives easier as maintainers. We don't have to maintain as many different build systems. So it is for our sake and sort of reducing complexity, and also, it makes it easier for us to direct users into a single lane or fewer lanes at least going forward. So those are the things we plan to remove later in 2025. The next release we plan to do, surprise, we hope that it will become 8.13.0. Ideally, hopefully, as long as we didn't break anything terribly bad and we have to do a patch release, but fingers crossed we don't have to do that. So, yep, that's the plan, right? And what do we hope to have in that release? Some of the things that we are considering, hoping, planning, trying, and working on. No promises, but we have these sort of in the pipeline. There's a connection event callback. Maybe you want to know when there's a go away package coming on the connection. That's what this is for. Coming maybe a option to disable the WebSocket auto-pong. If you get a ping, curl will auto-pong it. There's a PR in progress so that you can switch that off and put that into your own application instead, which then possibly has its advantages to some users. We have a new write-out option called TLS early data, pretty much telling you or returning how many bytes did you actually send in the early data, which is a way to let you know if the early data worked for you and how much you gained by using it, possibly. We have this upload flags option in the works. It's primarily for IMAP, or I would say this probably is for IMAP. It's a way to, so if you want, and when you upload with IMAP, you upload a mail, right? So, and here's a way to set different flags for that mail in that upload. Right now, it marks the email as seen automatically, so it'll look like you already read it when you upload it. But this is a way to not set that option, that flag. There are a few other flags you can toggle on and off too. So it'll just make it a more flexible way to upload things for IMAP. We're going to drop support for building with Visual Studio 2005 and older. And as you might remember, it's 2025 now, so those should be around 20 years or older. And I think if you haven't upgraded yet, I think you probably are still not using the latest kernel anyway. So I think this should not really hurt anyone very much. I have this pending PR that I'm really keen on getting feedback from users from too, because we haven't really made up our minds about this yet. It's a way to read URLs from a file using the -- URL option and download them all. So it's a way to just make it slightly more easier to download a lot of URLs if you have them in a file. It has its drawbacks too to do that, so I really want to know what you think about it. So check it out. You can try it and tell me what you think. There's also a option PR pending for adding pings to the MQTT support. And MQTT, someone noticed that when you subscribe to a topic in MQTT, you're just hanging on to the TCP connection and waiting for the server to send data at some point in whenever. And it turns out that, of course, both NATs and routers and whoever that kills off idle connections, and even MQTT servers do that. So if you haven't said anything in a while, they will just, oh, you must be dead, I'll cut you off. So servers might want you or require you to do those pings to remind the server that you're still alive. So here's this, just sends a ping and gets a pong back in some interval. There's a discussion then which interval, but that's in the PR. If you're an MQTT user, you might want to check that out. So the next release then, 8.13.0, is scheduled for April 2nd, 8 weeks from now. Surprise, surprise, that's the URL with the pending release codes, that release notes, that is automatically updated. And if you head over to that URL, you will see what we have merged into the master branch recently. That it tends to be updated every 3 to 5 days, so reasonably in sync with what's in the master branch. So, and as always, we have an 8-week release cycle. This is release Wednesday, that's today. We have a 10-day cooldown period in which we don't merge features, we merge bug fixes, and if we get a really serious alert about the bug, we do a follow-up release. Hopefully, ideally, we don't. And then we have a Saturday there, and then we open the feature window in which we allow features changes, new things, during 3 weeks until we close it on a Saturday again, because 3 weeks from Saturday to Saturday, and then we have a 25 days feature freeze, almost 4 weeks, until we have a release Wednesday again. And so this is February 5. On February 15, we open the feature window, and on March 8, we close the feature window again, go into the feature freeze, and then on April 2nd, we do the next release. So this is the plan. Hopefully, ideally, this is what's going to happen in the next 8 weeks. If you need help with curl in a support, commercial, enterprisey way, that's me. I do support for curl. Contact me. If you find any bugs, problems, typos, issues, whatever, go to GitHub, GitHub and submit. We're usually pretty responsive, and we work hard on fixing all the bugs that people report to us. So we should be able to fix the bugs you find as well. If you find or suspect any security problem, don't submit it on GitHub. Go to hackerone.com/curl and enter there, discuss it with us. And we will, if we don't agree that it's a security problem, we will not continue there. We will take it to the regular issues, or just close it if we think you're silly, if you're AI slop or whatever. But if it's a real, genuine security problem, we will work with you to figure it out and do the entire security dance the way we did it this time for 3 different CVEs, right? And I just want to remind you all that these are our best friends, the curl top sponsors in February 2025. They are the same ones that usually are our top sponsors. They're friends. They make sure that the infrastructure I mentioned before is working, chugging along, delivering, helping us make curl as good and solid and stable and fine as it is. So thanks to these guys, they make curl possible to do the way we do. So that's what I wanted to say today. Thank you. I've been long, but I hope you enjoy this. So until next release, have a good day.